Some of you may have heard the name John Coltrane. Some of you know exactly who John Coltrane is, or was rather. And for those of you who don't know who he was, maybe you've heard the name, but not really sure what he did. He was a jazz saxophonist, and he's considered jazz royalty, specifically when it comes to the saxophone. He had a monster album, at least in jazz circles, called Love Supreme, and he even had a hit single with a jazz cover of My Favorite Things. That's right, from The Sound of Music. And he's one of my favorite musicians as well, and I'm not alone in that. Many jazz fans love John Coltrane and his music. I would bet, though, that even a lot of the people that know who John Coltrane was and how important he was in jazz and how great he was, etc., what they don't know is that there is an actual religious denomination called the Church of the Saint John Coltrane. And it's been around a long time. I mean, it's been around for decades. And it's a branch of the African Orthodox Church. And they believe that John Coltrane, is not, a deity. He's not a god, or God, since Christian religion is monotheistic, one God. He's not God. He's just merely a saint that was sent to earth to do his saintly thing, like other saints. And this denomination started and still exists in San Francisco today. And I found out about this when I was living in San Francisco years ago. I don't remember how I found out about it. It wasn't like in the newspaper, online, or any media. I think someone just told me about it. I think I was at a jazz club and someone told me about it. And of course, I expressed surprise and skepticism, and he assured me that it existed. And so I went in and I tracked it down, which was not that easy. It really wasn't that easy. This was way before the church had embraced anything resembling, online media. And they were constantly moving all over San Francisco. They were always broke. The church didn't have a lot of members. And so finally, I did find out where they were, and they were actually pretty close to where I lived. I used to live in Pacific Heights, in the Pacific Heights section of San Francisco, and I pretty much at the corner of Washington and Fillmore, and they were on Fillmore. So going down Fillmore towards the Boom Boom Room. Not what you're thinking, if any of you have been over to Asia. The Boom Boom Room was actually John Lee Hooker's nightclub. He had a famous song called Boom Boom. So it was about halfway in between my house and the Boom Boom Room. I have no idea if the Boom Boom Room's still going, after Hooker's death some time ago. But it was a pretty lively place, for blues and rhythm and blues. So anyway, I found the church And the church, as it was actually in in a retail space that had been, a storefront, a tiny storefront. And there was a handwritten note on the door saying that the services were at a specific time, on Sunday. So I said, yeah, all right, I'm going to check this out, because what's not to like about this? This is kind of crazy, and, I love Coltrane, so I'm going to go check it out. So I showed up at the appointed time that was, written on the note that was taped to the glass door. And there were no services then. People were just kind of starting to trickle in. And so that's what I did too. I trickled in through the door and stood around. And then I would say probably about there were probably about high 20s, low 30s people there, number of people. And there was some setting up. I mean, people had instruments. There was like a makeshift stage, plywood stage, more like a riser, really, not a stage. And people were setting up instruments. And I thought, oh, well, okay, cool. They're gonna play some Coltrane. And there was no announcement made to kick it off. The band, as it were, just started noodling around on their instruments, and then they just started. They just started playing, and they were terrible, so ragged. Obviously, none of them, not a single one, had ever been a professional jazz musician, because no one would have paid them for their performance. I mean, they were just awful. But their hearts were pure and pious, with love for the Saint John Coltrane, and they just sort of gave it a go. Gave it their best shot, and they ended that, and there was some intermittent applause. I mean, there weren't a lot of people there, and they launched into another number, and then a guy, started. I guess you would call it preaching, but it was more like spoken word poetry while the band was playing. And he wasn't too skilled either at doing that. And I would say that went for another 2 or 3 numbers. And I was dying. I mean, it was so awful. I appreciated their enthusiasm and their fervor, but it was just, like I said, pretty ragged. The worst junior high school jazz band you've ever heard. The worst. I mean, they weren't as good as a junior high school band, or junior high school band. And then there was some recitation from some, they weren't really books, it was like a binder about John Coltrane and his mission to the world to spread joy and music, which, I appreciated. I mean, my jaundice and cynicism only extend so far. I'm not telling you this to poke fun at these people. I mean, they were absolutely sincere, and their belief was authentic. It was just, kind of a pushed together show. And I'm talking about the whole sermon being the show. And then everything just sort of tapered off. It ceased, and tapered off. And then they passed the plate for donations, which I readily gave. I could have. I think I might have been the biggest donor that day. And then everybody just kind of broke up and started packing up their instruments. And I thought, well, hey, that was pretty interesting. And I decided to do that again, the next week, which I did. So I went down there again, and I did that the next week. And again, they didn't start on time. In fact, they started even later. And the band was the same people. It was just as bad. And they started they started sliding into a Love Supreme, and I was just standing there thinking to myself, I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I was praying at that moment, please don't, please don't, please don't, please don't. They did. And it was just abysmal. And it went the same way. And again, at the end they passed the plate, and one of the main guys came up to me and asked me if I wanted to join as a member, that he had noticed me last week and this week, which was not difficult to do. I was the only white guy in the little space there, and I said, no, I don't think so, but I do appreciate what you're doing here and what you're trying to do, and I wish you all the success in the world. And he said, well, we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate you enjoying the love of John Coltrane that he gave to the world. And I said, you know it, man. And that's it. I never went back again. I heard a couple of years later that they had found more or less permanent quarters, but then I heard 6 months later, again at a jazz show, a lounge, that they had been booted out, evicted for non-payment. They were, always operating on a shoestring budget. I think now, from what I know, and don't hold me to this, but I think now they do have a permanent space. And that space is in the Marina Cultural Museum down by the water. And I think they have a permanent space now from which they, do their services. It's not for everyone, but hey, if you have an interest in definitely doing something different, and you're in San Francisco, check it out. I think it's not going to be profound. I don't think it's not going to move you. It's not going to change your life and send it spinning in another direction. But it's something you can say you did, right?